This is the Communicators. This week you will hear a series of interviews from the Gov 2.0 conference that took place in Washington, D.C. in September. Now, this conference serves as a meeting between leaders in the worlds of technology and government. And among those we interviewed is Ajit Chopra, the Chief Technology Officer for the United States. He gave us a few minutes of his time at the conference, and he'll join us next week for the whole show. But for now, from the site of the Gov 2.0 conference, here's Ajit Chopra. What does technology do for this White House as far as your mission is concerned?
Well, thank you. I serve as an assistant to the President and Chief Technology Officer. What that means is that I provide advice to the President on policies that will take advantage of technology and innovation on his priorities: healthcare, energy, education, cybersecurity. I'm also advocating for policies that promote technology innovation writ large in the economy. So in response, I actually provide more policy advice to the President on both of those components.
What kind of things does he ask your advice on?
Right now we're focused on healthcare. Healthcare reform is a big topic today. The role of healthcare information technology is an area of great interest. We have a fairly significant investment coming through the stimulus package, and my role is to help ensure that we have a data standards environment that will promote innovation in the healthcare marketplace, reward quality and transparency, lower costs. That's an example of an area that I'm focused on.
When it comes to the issue of healthcare, and especially when technology is concerned, one of those things that comes up is privacy.
Yes.
What's the White
critical.
House's concern about that?
Well, we're actually making our security and privacy provisions on healthcare IT amongst the most thoughtful and respectful of all privacy provisions. We're going to make this the showcase area. We have a committee of outside advisors that I serve on the panel on that have looked at security and privacy provisions and recommendations and standards for how the entire healthcare system should evolve. So if you want to avail yourself of the incentive payments that are going to be available through the stimulus package, you have to adhere to the highest levels of security and privacy, and those are all going to be enumerated through regulation later this fall.
Does the world of, when you talk about the stimulus, a lot of the stimulus money, or at least some of it, went out to broadband efforts. Is this part of your role?
Oh, absolutely. Technically, the broadband stimulus program is under the agency's responsibility. Both the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Commerce have wonderful programs. As an officer in the White House, it's my responsibility to support the coordination of the policy recommendations so that we're doing the right thing. All of this feeds into the National Broadband Plan. That's the work of the Federal Communications Commission, and I'm working very closely with my colleagues across the administration to ensure the best possible input into that broadband plan, and we have great confidence in Julius Genachowski that it will be a well done exercise.
As far as input is concerned, do you basically communicate what the President wants to see as far as where broadband goes, or do you work directly with the FCC as far as the particular details are concerned?
Well, we're actually trying to be mindful of the mechanisms by which we engage in independent agencies. So we're working very closely inside the administration to organize our input, if you will, and finding thoughtful ways to introduce that input into the FCC process, but largely keeping it to the FCC as it's directed by the stimulus package.
Talk a little bit about how the White House uses social media, and does that fall under, as far as what you tell the President about, is how better to use it to communicate?
A little bit. I would say 1/3 of my mission is instilling the culture of open government. One of the first things he did in office was to direct my office before I arrived to submit recommendations on how we create a more open, transparent, participatory government, one that's more collaborative. So in that pillar, I'm working closely with our Chief Performance Officer and our Chief Information Officer to create a culture within the government that is focused on openness and transparency. So I give recommendations to the administration on how best to do that. In fact, we talked today that hopefully in a few weeks we'll be launching an open government directive by Director Orzag at the Office of Management and Budget. So we will have policy criteria out to focus on how we hardwire accountability in the agencies for open government.
As far as other issues are concerned, talk a little bit about the other things that you do that many people may not know about as far as what falls under your job.
I would say that think of my job in two parts. First is to make sure that we're coordinated on policy on the issues that I just described, but also to demonstrate that the policies can work in action. Just today, the President 3 weeks ago had announced that we wanted to launch within the Veterans Administration a new innovative website that would allow frontline workers, the 19,000 of them, to submit their ideas on how we can reduce the claims backlog or to reduce the turnaround times. Today we launched that website, and already in just a matter of hours, thousands of federal employees have already provided comments and ideas on the site. Our premise here is to demonstrate what works. The President called for a government that focuses on effectiveness and efficiency. And so today, less than 3 weeks after he called for it, we've put up this website at the VA, celebrate the leadership at the VA for having taken on this project, and it's an area of demonstrating what works, and we hope to do more of these across the federal government.
Ajit Chopra, the Chief Technology Officer for the White House, thanks for your time.
My pleasure, thank you.
Monica Guzman, from how you see it, how has the internet changed journalism?
Oh my gosh, it's almost too big a topic to even begin to talk about. It's everything from fewer, bigger voices dominating conversation and news production, and a lot more smaller voices that are getting progressively louder, to new beats such as what they call hyperlocal, neighborhood. Over in Seattle, it's kind of a laboratory for all of these new things, and we've got just amazing neighborhood level blogs that are showing that, oh my gosh, there are niches that are undiscovered. So there's that, and then there's participation, which is a big topic of this conference, and how the public is affecting news, how the conversation about news is becoming part of the story, and how, as journalists, we can then take all that information, feed it back into our work, and just kind of create a better loop and a better system for everyone.
If all those things are true and it's an experiment, how's your paper faring now as an online publication?
Well, right, I was going to say, we're not in paper anymore. In March, we became the largest, as far as I know, largest city metro daily to go online. So in the months since, we've been doing fairly well, and we've got some time to kind of get our stuff together. We are experimenting a lot. It's an adventure. It's like no newsroom I've ever worked in, for sure. We went from being a fairly large newsroom that could cover many beats, if not pretty much all the beats in the city, to one that really had to pick and choose and say, okay, we need our reporters to be able to report in depth about something. So which beats are we going to choose to dominate? Because we can't do it all anymore. So we're in this new ecosystem of Seattle media, and we have to figure out where we fit. So it's a continuous process.
You're identified as a news gatherer. Is that different than a reporter?
Well, it's an interesting term, and then sometimes people go like, well, why even bother to call yourself a news gatherer? I think to me what the term reflects is that we not only report, but moderate conversations about news. We go out and we engage with other media, and we aggregate whatever other media are saying. So in a sense, it's reporting, sure, but with so many new elements that you almost want to give it a new name, and I think that's where news gatherer comes from.
As far as what you do for the online, then, there's something called the Big Blog.
Yeah.
What is it?
The Big Blog started in July of 2007 in an effort to kind of be a more conversational, everything kind of bucket for all sorts of quirky features, stuff about Seattle. It's evolved to become, I think, a place where there's kind of a value of, what's Seattle talking about, where is Seattle being talked about, and just getting everybody kind of together to share in something of a love of the city, and just what are the people in it doing, et cetera, et cetera. It's more featuresy and artsy than newsy, especially since the paper closed, and we don't have an arts department. And it just kind of, it tells some stories in chapters, it tells some stories very briefly, tells other stories at length, but we like to just keep it as a mix.
Is that your main responsibility, or do you have other news gathering responsibilities?
That is my main responsibility, but since the paper closed and we went online only, pretty much every reporter, news gatherer, producer, we're all evolving to all be doing the same thing. So I'm now writing individual stories apart from the blog, and everybody's kind of in a mishmash. Actually, the goal, one of the goals of SeattlePI.com with its staff, which I really appreciate, is to train everyone to do everything. So we're going to be trained to be better photographers. I'm already being trained to run the website, to actually produce it, which is a really kind of scary responsibility, but a lot of fun. So yeah, I mean, we kind of do it all.
If technology changed the way people read your publication, does technology help you then in your job gathering and putting together the news?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, words can't even express how much it helps. I mean, one of the ways I express it is, first of all, you can only quote so many people, one or two people in a story, but the internet allows people to quote themselves. And you can go in, and while you're sleeping, they might be leaving comments on your story, and you wake up and you go, oh my gosh, I didn't know about this, that, or the other thing. News becomes a process where everybody is engaged and involved, and 600,000 heads in Seattle, always better than one reporter, sitting and doing whatever work they can do in a couple hours. So it's absolutely a godsend when it comes to gathering information. But you have to be well connected. You have to be in those spaces and have a presence.
Are you concerned about the rate that blogs are reporting news, but in the many cases the blogs don't have editorial oversight? And does that concern you for the job that you do?
For the job that I do, well, here's here's why I don't think it's as bad as some people think it is. I think that more and more the public is becoming an editor, and those sites that report falsehoods or have an extreme bias, people aren't dumb, and pretty soon, you know, you're going to kind of notice just by the readership that they're not taken seriously. So for me, it's kind of a more crowdsourced system where news is no longer handed to you on a silver platter. Here, this is credible news. It's a newspaper that's been around for hundreds of years. You don't even have to wonder about it. Now the reader has to do some work. But is it a bad thing that there might be a blog that sucks out there that really doesn't know what it's doing? Well, no one reads it, so who cares? And it's almost better to keep it open so that all these new things can emerge freely. And sometimes you get duds, but a lot of times you get, you know, blockbusters.
What kind of response has the Seattle public had to the site-only version? What kind of hits are you getting? Where are people paying attention to as far as parts of the site are concerned?
Let's see, parts of the site. We're seeing, we've always had like photo galleries and ways to tell a story. For example, event coverage. There's always been a challenge in journalism. Oh, it's the same event every year. How do you cover it? And what we've discovered is people love to look at photos. They love to see themselves at a recent event. And so photo galleries have been a very popular feature. As far as page views, I'm pretty sure I'm allowed to say that we get about 30 million page views a month. And that is down a little bit from when we were a newspaper, but I think that pretty confident that it's all right. It's pretty stable. Other things people pay attention to, we're very blog focused, so a reporter is given a beat and very much expected to blog, to have a Twitter account, to write stories, but to stay on top of that beat. We're really trying to avoid this temptation that the internet gives reporters to just skim and to just aggregate and be a little lazy. So we're really kind of doing those things in depth, and we're sacrificing the fact that we just can't cover everything. We're covering a few things, and we're doing the best we can.
You seem optimistic about the future of journalism under this new technology.
Absolutely.
Do others you work with, maybe others generationally, have that same optimism?
That's an interesting point. I'm not sure if I've talked that in depth with people of my generation. I know I've talked with my colleagues about it. And there's competing senses. I mean, there's a lot of people who bemoan what they think is like the loss of investigative journalism, and that's probably the most serious subject when it comes to journalism. We've got people participating, that's great. We've got crowdsourcing, awesome. But what about the kind of work that takes a lot of money and a lot of time? And it's true that newsrooms have fewer resources for that. My take on that is that it's not all being lost. There are things being gained. Like the Gov 2.0 conference, we're talking about open data. And if you can empower your readers to be their own investigative reporters, maybe that's better. Maybe that's the same, than one guy in a suit stuck in the third floor office who has 3 months to write a story. So I think there's a give and take here, and in the end, I think we're all going to benefit from the fact that everything is one big swirling conversation that never ends.
Monica Guzman, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hal Varian, you're chief economist for Google. What does that mean as far as what you do for your job?
Well, I do a variety of things. One of the things I work on is Google's auction model. We make money by auctioning off ad space, so I do a lot of work on that. Also with my team, we work on a lot of the forecasting problems with query volume and with revenue forecasting. And then a certain amount of it comes into public policy, where I get called into issues like intellectual property, privacy, copyright, that kind of thing.
When you have to deal with those policy issues, what do you do as far as talking to the folks in government and here in DC about your concerns that you might have about those issues?
Well, we've got a whole policy team who specializes in that sort of thing. A lot of cases I'm brought in, along with other people, to get our views and look at different angles of the problem, see what the right position is.
What's the chief concern as far as intellectual property is concerned of yours?
Well, these days, as you know, it's the Google Books and the library project, so there's a lot of discussion within Google and outside Google about how that should be structured.
And any thoughts on how it should be structured then?
Well, I think it's a great boon for mankind, so I'm all for it. I think a lot of these issues are pretty technical, and it's hard to discuss in this venue.
Is privacy a concern of yours?
Oh, absolutely. Privacy is a huge issue at Google. We have a lot of policies in place to try to protect users' privacy, and we think it's something that's quite important.
Is it one of those policies that constantly need updating?
Absolutely, because there's always new technology happening and there are always impacts on privacy, and so we try to get ahead of the curve on some of this stuff. You look at it, there's On the one hand, the more you know about somebody, the better you can serve them in terms of search results, in terms of ads. On the other hand, people sometimes feel uncomfortable with that, and you want to respect that feeling. So there's always a balancing act that's going on there.
And how do you achieve that balance then?
Well, I think it's something that you just have to listen to what people are saying, and there's very, very different attitudes from country to country. It's amazing the differences that people have exhibited in terms of how comfortable they are, how uncomfortable they are with certain kinds of technology.
How does the United States fall within that comfort level?
Well, we tend to be more comfortable. A nice example is Street View, where Street View is pretty widely viewed as a very helpful product in the US. In other countries, people are more suspicious of it. I think there's just a difference in cultural background. You have to be aware of how people perceive things in different societies.
You talked about online advertising. In Congress, one of the issues that comes out of the Commerce committees from time to time is that about behavioral advertising and the type of information that's used in order to achieve that. What's your role as far as that discussion is concerned?
Well, one of the things that we look at is how effective it is to really have this kind of personalized advertising. And if we could provide better ads for people, we can provide things that are more relevant and more meaningful, I think that's got to be viewed as a plus. In general, people aren't worried about the intended uses of these technologies to provide more relevant ads. They're worried about unintended uses, and so the question then is to be able to get the benefits from the intended uses without having anything happening on a negative side.
Unintended uses such as?
Well, identity theft and that kind of thing. So it's very, very easy for you to be able to buy with a 1 click or 2 clicks. On the other hand, the fact that it's easy for you might make it easy for a criminal to do the same thing. So things that make it easy for you can also make it easy for other people, and you need to do this balancing to get that managed.
Do you get concerned that these issues may result in more regulation from the federal government?
Well, the question is not so much more regulation, it's whether the regulation is really informed or whether the regulation is really sensitive to this benefit-cost trade-off. I mean, sometimes you can get regulation that's stampeded in one direction or another. We want thoughtful regulation.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, when I say we want thoughtful regulation, I don't necessarily mean that that's. What I mean to say there is, if you're going to have regulation, we like it to be thoughtful and well designed.
And you want input in that, of course.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the way we do it, and that's the way every industry, every kind of regulation works in the U.S.
Do you talk to members of Congress about this?
Have I talked? I've testified before Congress on a few things. We've talked to congressional staff members, but as I say, I tend to leave that up to the professionals.
You talked about auctioning off of keywords.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about that.
So the way Google's business model works is that advertisers buy keywords, users issue searches or queries, and if the keyword matches the query, then the advertiser enters an auction to have his ad displayed. So generally the highest bidder gets displayed in the most prominent position, and that's the model that runs Google.
Is that a competitive business?
Oh, that's hugely competitive, hugely competitive.
As far as people who want the certain keywords and access to it?
Absolutely, that's why you have to have some way of resolving these differences, because the people that are bidding the most are basically able to display their ads. Essentially, the same thing works in any advertising business. You're going to sell your prime time commercials at a different time than your midnight commercials. Here we're doing it by a regular auction.
And so as far as resolving those differences, do you act as mediator then?
We're kind of the auctioneer. We're the mediator. We're the market maker to help the content providers and the advertisers come together.
Al Varian of Google, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
John Markoff of the New York Times, you write a lot about cybersecurity. You're in DC right now. What's the conversation here taking place about that issue?
Well, I think that everyone is waiting for a cyber czar. And the conversation is what's going on behind the scenes and in that process within the administration to pick someone. And, you know, I think there are some divisions that have set things back. But I think they're also close to a couple people. And I think then things move again after they get someone in place. They need, you know, there was a report and the argument was they needed leaders, and we're waiting for the leader, and there will be a leader, and then we'll see.
Who, in your mind, or at least from the topic that you've written about, what makes a good leader in this position?
You know, so it depends on the community that you're talking to. There is this group of what I'd call internet companies, and there is this argument within a part of the administration that they don't want to cut off innovation and growth. I mean, you could have a perfectly secure internet that wouldn't work. So there are these trade-offs they're struggling with, and I don't know how they're going to make that compromise. But those are the two sides, I think, that are sort of fencing.
And my follow-up question was, obviously the community in Silicon Valley looks at this issue, especially as far as how much DC gets involved in it, than here in DC. What's, other than what you've described, what are folks in the community there talking about?
So Silicon Valley, I mean, clearly there is that perspective that you need an open internet, and if you regulate things too much, I mean, they really push back on regulation. On the other hand, I have to tell you, you know, the Computer Security Industry Conference is called RSA, happens every year, gets bigger every year. And I sort of measure it by the number of PR, you know, invitations I get. This year was just over the top. That industry is booming, and so the Valley is very much part of this this industry that sort of profits from the, you know, all of the troubles. And it's sort of this interesting, you don't know what side they're really on at the end of the day.
So it's a profit thing and their security about their own industry thing.
Well, you know, the worse things get, the better they get. It's this odd kind of situation.
As far as individuals with their computers, we saw with the Conflicker virus not too long ago that maybe one person or a few group of people can take down networks. How does the government react to that, or at least how, you know, what's the conversation about how much reaction should there be from the government on that?
Well, what's interesting that's changed with the government getting involved, with governments getting involved, is that there are literally dozens of governments who are sort of building offensive, quote, cyber war capabilities. And I think that tremendously complicates the issue of computer security, not in a good way, because you have big and small countries, and you have this new kind of battlefield that is not symmetrical. Right? It's the United States in some ways is the most vulnerable because we're the most technically advanced. And I don't know how that's going to shake out, but I think governments building offensive weapons for deterrence or for whatever reason is a really disturbing new feature on the landscape.
Do a lot of the companies in Silicon Valley have DC representation, especially on these issues?
Well, the Valley grew up decades ago, and so the Valley is very sophisticated in its contacts with Washington, going all the way back to the semiconductor industry, and that was the 1970s. So the Valley is a player in Washington, and you know, going all the way back to, I don't know if you remember this, when Clinton came into office, John Scully was prominently portrayed on television at some, you know, I think it was a State of the Union address. That was really the arrival of Silicon Valley on the national scene, and we're here. They're here.
As far as other issues that you write a lot about cybersecurity. Being based in California, what other issues are you following?
Well, so my own situation is I moved from the business section, from covering Silicon Valley, to the science section, and it has been mostly cybersecurity, but I'm trying to find my way to write about things at the point of intersection between computing and science. And you know, all science is computational now, so it takes me all kinds of directions. Recently, I've been writing about material science. I'm very interested in battery technology. I'm interested in kind of material stuff going on to build next generation semiconductors. The question it's always asked in Silicon Valley is, when's Moore's law going to end? And it's not ending yet, but it always looks like it's about to end, and so that's fun.
Do you see those conversations entering on a federal level as the government talks about the growth of green jobs, as the government talks about technology perhaps to control things like climate change and things of that nature?
Well, so the climate change issue is an interesting one because people are talking about geoengineering, and I wrote earlier this year about another community, the artificial intelligence research community, that now believes they have to start thinking like the biotechnologists. The biotechnologists met at Asilomar in 1972 because they were worried that their technology might crawl out of a laboratory, and now the AI guys are starting to think about that too.
John Markoff of the New York Times, thank you.
You're welcome.
Carl Malamud, talk a little bit about public.resource.org and why should the government be interested in things that you're involved with?
Well, we're a nonprofit organization and we help put government information online. We've been putting about 90 million pages of government information on the internet, and then we try to show the government why this information is important and why they should be running this service instead of us.
What kind of information do you put on your site?
Well, we have 20 million pages of documents from the federal judiciary, for example. We put all the Court of Appeals documents on the internet so any citizen can read a Court of Appeals decision. A year and a half ago, those were unavailable on the net. There is a feeling among lawyers that this information is not necessarily of general interest to the public, and we're trying to demonstrate that people really do care about reading the law.
So that it's out there, what kind of interest are you getting to the site, and what are the people most interested in from those who visit your site?
There is a tremendous pent-up demand for access to what I call America's operating system, primary legal materials in the United States. A lot of public interest lawyers have not had access to the legal materials they need. A lot of government lawyers have not had access. So this is not just laymen and citizens, but then journalists, any executive of a company needs to read the law, and so we're trying to get this information out there. Not only Court of Appeals decisions, but we posted, for example, all the building and electrical and fire codes for the entire country on our system. So any kid studying for a plumbing license is able to read the plumbing code before they go in for the exam.
Is it easy to consume by the average person as far as the information that's on your site?
Well, it depends who the average person is. It's a big country. There's what Chris Anderson from Wired called the long tail, and there's always a large number of people out there, millions of people, interested in what appear to be very technical documents. And that ranges from patent data to building codes to Securities and Exchange Commission documents, which I had also posted on the internet.
This is done on your own effort. How would you rate the government's current effort in trying to make itself transparent? This president on his first day said that his government would be very transparent and wanted to use technology to do that. How's he holding up? I
have been putting government information on the internet for over 20 years. This administration is totally different than any other one that I've worked with.
How so?
People will return your phone calls. People are trying to do the right thing. There are always issues of, getting it through the government, getting it through the bureaucracy, but there is at least an attempt and an effort to get more information online where people can use it.
And so you said people return phone calls. Does that mean you're in direct dialogue with the administration and areas of government?
I am, yeah. No, I'm working with half a dozen government agencies now. I know people. In fact, I used to work for a guy named John Podesta at the Center for American Progress. A lot of my colleagues ended up in the administration. Folks at General Services Administration and the Congress Government Printing Office all return phone calls, are willing to work with us, yes.
How would you rate success then for the person that visits your site, they look at information, what would you say at the end of the day, how would you rate success for what you do?
My success will be when our site goes away and the government is providing this information instead of us. I'm trying to put ourselves out of business. Our success will be when all primary legal materials in the United States, all the cases and codes and statutes can be downloaded by any kid in a dorm room onto their laptop, and they can start a company or a public interest group or do whatever they want with it.
Mr. Malamud, we thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
We'll show you more interviews in a future program from the Gov 2.0 conference. And don't forget, Ajit Chopra, the Chief Technology Officer of the United States, is our guest next week. If you want to see these interviews again, go to our website. It's located at cspan.org.